Florida's Women in Energy Leadership Forum was launched to inform, inspire, motivate diverse talent to join the energy workforce by intentional recognition of current female energy leaders who contribute to growing Florida's economy and the purposeful sharing of their professional journeys. We are creating opportunity. Join me each week as we meet new leaders in energy and listen to their important roles in an industry that is vital to the country's future. Hello, viewers and listeners. Welcome to this week's Florida's Women in Energy Leadership Forum. I'm excited about today's show because I'm with Julie Wraithmell, who is the Executive Director of Audubon, Florida, and Holly Henderson with Duke Energy in their Environmental and External Affairs Outreach Department. And so I want to throw out the first question to you, Julie, and then ask, in responding to that question, if you'll tell folks a little bit more about what you do in particular at Audubon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us today, Lila. Like you said, I'm Julie Wraithmell. I'm Executive Director for Audubon, Florida. We're the state's oldest statewide conservation organization and the state office of the National Audubon Society. For 120 years, we've been working in Florida to protect water and wildlife and habitat. And in Florida, that also means needing to care about things like energy and climate, as well as land use decisions. So we have about 100 staff around the state who are researchers and resource managers, educators, policy wonks. I'm a biologist by training, but have worked in the policy sphere for about 15 years. And we also have about 45 grassroots chapters around the state. So these are hardworking, engaged advocates and volunteers who are working to make Florida a better and more sustainable place, not just for our wildlife, but for our people too.
So Holly, that's music to your ears as the Environmental Affairs Director there. And one of your responsibilities is environmental policy as it relates to Duke. So, you know, for all of those folks that might be listening, wondering about this combination, why is a relationship with Audubon important to your work?
Appreciate the opportunity to be here today, Lila, to join Julie in this podcast. Audubon, we consider to be one of our key stakeholders here in the state. We've had a well-established long-term working relationship, both with the statewide organization and Julie and her team, as well as many of the chapters that operate in our service territory. So we're spread out across the state here in Florida. We have around 1.8 million customers. We serve some, part, all, most, a little bit of 35 different counties. And so we kind of sprawl across the state, starting on the western edge in Wakulla County, and kind of go wrap around down south, head down towards St. Pete, and then back across a little bit towards the Atlantic coast. So we kind of cover a little bit of everything. But in what I do as Environmental Policy and Energy Affairs Director, part of my job is strategic look at environmental policy for what we're doing here in the state. And part of it is engaging with stakeholders like Audubon, Florida, to find ways that we can work together and collaborate and find ways to partner around environmental issues, natural resource issues, and wildlife issues here in the state.
Let me take this opportunity to remind our viewers that you can submit questions to ask Holly and Julie, and we'll answer them in real time. And their contact information is scrolling across the screen. So if you want to reach out to them afterwards, you certainly are welcome to do so. We're really grateful for Duke Energy sponsoring today's program. So thank you for describing the importance of your relationship and what you each do. So let's drill down a little bit on the areas where you've partnered. Holly, I know that Audubon is coming off of, you just came off of your annual program, Julie. I'm sure Duke plays a role in that, but this relationship is deeper. You also share the commonality of wanting to make sure that Florida has a sustainable future. Do you want to elaborate on the areas of partnership with Duke in that regard? Either one of you can take that question, or both.
Absolutely. Duke has been a wonderful partner to Audubon Florida, and we work together on many different fronts, whether it's working with us on our Audubon Assembly, like you mentioned, it was our state conference, which we had this year virtually because of 2020, or whether it's partnering on our Center for Birds of Prey and the important work we do rehabilitating and returning injured raptors to the skies of Florida, and using community scientists to monitor bald eagle nesting around the state. Or it's working with folks like Holly on the really exciting new proposals that the investor-owned utilities and Duke in particular have for expanding Florida's solar infrastructure. Some of the industrial scale solar ambitions that Duke has committed to really are the kinds of change that Florida needs to meet the challenges of sea level rise and climate change that we're feeling the effects of now.
And Holly, that's our first audience question is about solar. So the question is, when you construct a solar facility, where is it do you reach out to entities like Audubon?
Well, we like to have we talk about our stakeholder engagement. So we currently have pending in front of the Florida Public Service Commission a program to deploy additional solar, if the commission approves it, to be 750 megawatts. So this would be about 10 utility scale projects. And one of the things we did before we actually finalized and submitted that filing is we had extensive stakeholder engagement, and that included a wide array of organizations. But one of the partners we did talk with was Audubon. So we sat down, we walked through, here's what we're planning to do, here's how we're considering structuring the program, here's what it means to Florida, here's what it means to our climate goals at Duke Energy, and gave them the chance to give us thoughts and feedback and react to it. So we do engage in that because we do value the input that our stakeholders, who often are our customers as well, give us as we design programs, including things like solar.
And so clearly, Julie, just to close that loop, if you will, Audubon does support those solar projects then, and the environmental path that Duke is on.
Absolutely. We think that it's important that we move as quickly as possible to a solar future. And it's great to see consumers having the ability to get their energy from these kinds of sources. It's great for neighborhoods too. I think what we're finding for a lot of communities is people realize that solar is a great neighbor to have. It's quiet. It often has vegetative buffers. It doesn't require any water. It doesn't increase truck traffic on your roads. And so really, it's an exciting opportunity for a lot of communities to be cleaner, but also have a great neighbor.
Holly,
and we appreciate.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I was just saying, we appreciate organizations like Audubon who offer up that kind of support, because surprisingly, sometimes you do find parties that oppose solar. Some of it is, there is a certain element of, people who just don't want anything of any kind nearby. But there's also a lot of, the internet's a great source of information, as we all know, and it's a great source of misinformation, as we all know. And when you're looking to find reasons to be against something, it's a very ready source of misplaced and poor information. So, we appreciate it when, like Audubon is willing to say, like Julie just did, why solar makes a good neighbor, because it really does in so many ways.
Absolutely. So, Holly, as you know, I keep up with, obviously, the news clips on this industry for a number of reasons, including, of course, the Florida's Women in Energy Leadership Forum. But in getting ready for the forum where your president, Catherine Stempian, will be speaking, I ran across the press related to the inaugural ESG Day that Duke Energy created, put forward, sponsored. So for those that might be listening and don't know what ESG is or the relevance, can you speak to the entire initiative?
I'm happy to. So ESG Day was Environmental, Social, and Governance Day. And so this was an event structured for investors in particular who are showing an increased interest in how companies like Duke are managing core issues and core values around environmentalism, around social responsibility, and around governance. So this was, while it was targeted to the investor community, there is information out on our website about it, duke-energy.com. And if you Google ESG Day, you can actually get to the transcript, and I believe there's some audio of the event if you're interested in going back and listening. But what it gave us a chance to do is to talk specifically about the things that we have done and some upcoming steps we plan to make around the environment, which involved things such as here in Florida, talking a little bit more about our solar plans and how we're progressing towards our climate goals that we announced last year. In the social responsibility sphere, it gave us the opportunity, particularly in the backdrop of some of the things that happened earlier this year in terms of racial justice and social equity issues that have been raised, to talk about the importance of those issues to our company and some of the steps and things that we're focusing on in the near term to try to, to make further progress in that respect. And then it was also an opportunity to bring it all together with governance and talk about how being transparent in our operations and having a strong ethical code to guide our operations, to guide the decisions made by our board of directors, helps us to do better and to be the best that we can be as a company. So I think that the event was well received. There was a lot of good information shared, and the people who joined us and listened in, I think, came away with a really strong sense of how we are hitting all of those three notes, E, S, and G.
So we have our second question, Holly. I'm going to take it that this is for you. You mentioned racial justice programs and Duke's awareness in that regard. What are some of the things that Duke has sponsored or put forward related to racial justice?
Okay. Well, one of the things that we did do in the immediate aftermath of a lot of the social protests that followed George Floyd's death, we did offer up to a lot of the organizations, not just here in Florida, but across our multi-state footprint, foundation dollars to support activities in the social and racial justice and equity space. So I think here in Florida, that ended up being about $160,000. We've also had a whole series of internal employee conversations to better understand where our fellow workers are coming from, to hear concerns, to share concerns, and to have an internal dialogue around how do we, what do we as employees feel, and what are we seeing and experiencing, and how can we do better internally in terms of our relationships with each other. And then one final thing that was touched on during ESG Day was a discussion of some environmental justice principles that we're in the process of developing and operationalizing. Going back to an earlier question and commentary around stakeholder engagement, how can we make sure that we're doing the best job possible when we go to site infrastructure and engaging the community, and making sure that we're just not continuing to haven't disproportionately impacted certain communities, or continuing to disproportionately impact certain communities as we make major investments in site infrastructure.
Well, in that regard, so two questions there, Julie, inspired by Holly's great response is, there historically, back when I served on the commission through the next decade after that, there was always concern expressed about cost of solar and affordability. I think everyone would agree there's been significant progress in that regard, so that everyone can have access to green energy, solar energy, if they so choose. It may be different depending on the company and geography, but I think a lot of progress has been made. What's Audubon's position in that regard, and how has it influenced, do you think, the process all of the companies are using?
Absolutely. Audubon's very committed not just to climate adaptation and climate resilience, but also climate justice. And I think that, the PSC has been vocal about making sure that renewables are accessible to all customers, and that, Duke and the other investor-owned utilities have been very responsive to that in their proposals. They share an interest in making it accessible as well. That said, I think it's important that we also acknowledge that communities of color frequently bear the impacts of environmental issues disproportionately as well. Some of these communities are feeling the heat literally from climate change to degrees that that other communities are not. Oftentimes, they are living in areas that are increasingly seeing flooding and those impacts. So, by moving to renewables, hopefully we're helping to level that playing field a little bit and reintroduce some justice into those disproportionate environmental impacts that many of those communities have borne for too long.
I don't know if the two of you have noticed, but there are comments that are popping up on the screen, and it sounds like you'll have some follow-up on the environmental justice issues from some of our viewers. Holly, I'm going to cheat a little bit, Julie, just because I've known Holly for so long, and we're part of some of the same initiatives. And Holly, before ESG Day and before the tragic murder of George Floyd. I mean, obviously these issues have been going on for far too long, but before those things happened, you were one of the board members, I think you still are, one of the board members of the Big Bend Minority Chamber of Commerce, and you've just made an announcement as it relates to minority chambers of commerce, right?
Yes. So in particular, a lot of you probably are thinking of the foundation grant that we made to the BBMC. It's a $10,000 grant. We're very excited. This is our first opportunity to partnership with them. I was kind of pleased as a board member to be able to bring this to Duke's attention, and that our foundation board saw the merit in the organization. But what they're planning to do with those dollars is to focus on minority businesses, women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses even, and do some training around business resiliency planning. And sort of with the strange year that 2020 has been, I think that that's highlighted for all businesses, even ones like Duke, where we do a lot of emergency planning and contingency planning, that planning is really important. And sometimes planning for the scenarios that you think just aren't going to happen, that you really do need to be giving them some thought. So it's our hope by partnering with BBMC that these very small businesses will be able to develop a real plan of action, whether the event is a hurricane, which we're all kind of watching Etta kind of churning around and seeing where that's going to go, or it's an event like COVID-19 that we're experiencing now.
Right.
So we're
Julie,
excited about that, and I'm pleased and appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You should be commended for that. But I also commend you for understanding there's more to be done, right? I mean, that good work, I think, can be replicated. And the leadership of your company, not just in Florida, we should acknowledge that you serve in parts of Carolina as well, and you're headquartered in North Carolina. But and I fundamentally believe leadership starts from the top. Incidentally, not that. And not that we don't have great leadership in our other investor-owned utilities in the state of Florida, but the president of Duke Energy Enterprise is Lynn Good, and the president of Duke Energy Florida is Catherine Stempian, right? One of the few women CEOs, executives in the industry. Julie, so what Holly just described, the grants and the foundation opportunities with minority chambers and groups that really we all need to focus as it relates to environmental justice, social justice, racial justice. Is that yet another opportunity for you to partner with companies like Duke, whether it's matching the funding or bringing attention to the funding and probably things that I'm not even thinking about, but it seems like that's another alliance opportunity for you.
It absolutely is. And, for a very long time, many of these communities have not had the voice in decision making and stakeholder processes that is really warranted. And so By providing those kinds of investments, it's making it possible for us to include these voices. And I firmly believe that it's going to result in much stronger and more durable solutions, in addition to more equitable solutions.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's a great opportunity for us to work together, and we're grateful to do for their leadership.
How can people get involved with the Audubon Society?
Absolutely. So like I said, there's 45 chapters around the state. You can find a chapter that's local to you on our website, which is fl.audubon.org. We have always been a volunteer strong organization, and that means that we need every kind of talent that someone could possibly bring to the group. And it's really one of the things that makes us most creative and able to address issues on a local level. When you think about it, Audubon was formed in the early 1900s in the fight to end the plume trade, when women were wearing wading birds' feathers on their hats and other fashion, and came together and said, we're about to drive these species to extinction. We have to pass legislation to change that. One of the most impressive things about that, I think, is that many of the women that drove the passage of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act did so before they even had the right to vote.
Oh, right.
So
Isn't that
very
something?
much in the spirit of our organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've recruited Holly to volunteer, right?
Of course, of course. Duke is very good about not just putting their financial resources behind what they care about, but actually investing sweat equity. Their staff really do.
Absolutely. Well, great. So we have our first personal question for you, Julie.
And with
Holly, go ahead. There is a
I was just going to say real quickly. That's okay. No worries. I was just going to add that when we look at allocating grant dollars and organizations like Audubon apply for foundation dollars, one of the things we do ask about in that application process is whether or not there are volunteer opportunities for our employees to engage with the organization on whatever the activity is that they're requesting the grant dollars to support. So we do look for those opportunities for our employees to be engaged, not just to say, we'll send you the check, but that we're really actively partnering with them, whatever it is they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and Julie, I found out recently, but from my alma mater, Audubon does a lot of grant work and outreach to colleges and universities, and that just shows both of your partnerships and willingness to look at the next generation and really influence the environment for years to come, I hope. So I don't know if the floodgates will open and you'll start getting requests from all colleges or universities, but I do appreciate that you support study and thank you on their behalf. So we have our first personal question. So let's just dive into some of that. As you know, this was started because of the Florida's Women in Energy Leadership Forum, which I have to share a personal story and give Holly a lot of credit here before we get into asking the two of you questions about your background. So most people know that when I started the forum 2015, 2016, Holly was the first corporate person I went to, and I said, here's the vision, here's what I want to do, and I would like a company to be a title sponsor. Can we make this happen? And I want you to know that it became a passion for Holly, and but for not willingness to take it forward, we wouldn't be where we are with the forum. And so that's my shameless way of transitioning to today's probably the last day you can register for the forum. So I would hope that if you are interested and want to hear Catherine Stempian with Duke Energy Florida, and Eric Szilagyi with Florida Power and Light, and Rob Dennett with Amira Technologies, and Joy Ditto with the American Public Power Association, that Lisa Sparrow with Corix Group of Companies, that you really, really need to register. And those are just the keynoters. It's 2.5 days of wonderful programming, thanks to sponsors like Duke and the other title sponsor, Florida Power and Light, and all of our sponsors. I mean, it does take a village to put these things on. So really appreciate it. And Holly, I appreciate your leadership. So tell us your background, Holly. You have an untraditional, non-traditional way of getting into the energy sector. How did you get
Well,
into?
before I came to energy, I worked for quite a few years in telecommunications. And in particular, at the time, I worked for a unit out of the Southern Company in Atlanta. Southern Company has its own telecom business, and I worked in external affairs there for quite a few years. Had the opportunity to transfer down to Florida to work for Southern's Florida affiliate at the time, Gulf Power, and moved to Tallahassee, where I did regulatory work for several years. And then I went to dinner with at Florida Women in Energy in 2018 right. And met Amy Mangan from Duke Energy. And a year later, here I am working for Duke in environmental policy and energy affairs. So it has been, an interesting career route, I would say, to people and to women in particular thinking about the energy industry. You could say there's a traditional path into it, but there are also sort of the non-traditional paths that don't involve being an electrical engineer and starting out either working in the plant or driving a truck. We have about 30,000 employees enterprise-wide, and a lot of those people are not engineers. They're accounting and finance specialists. They're human relations specialists. They are communications specialists. They're environmental specialists. There's a whole team of people that I partner with whose full-time job it is to make sure that we follow all state and federal environmental laws and regulations, that what we do when we operate our plants, when we operate our grid, falls within the regulatory guidelines. So there's a ton of opportunity within the industry, and you don't have to start out as an electrical engineer in order to get your foot in the door. Sometimes you just have to go to Florida Women in Energy Leadership Forum and meet people and find the opportunities that are out there. I would say I've had a very interesting career. My job's really had an external focus, because what I do enjoy doing, whether it's been in telecommunications or energy, has been working with our external partners. Those have been regulators, legislators, customers, and stakeholders like Audubon. And that's what, to me, makes my job interesting and exciting. What motivates me to get up each day is knowing the wide range of people that I get to spend every day interacting with on some really key issues that are important to the company, that are important to our customers, and important to good policy and to moving us forward as an industry.
So Julie, I don't know about you, but I think she's become a full-fledged Floridian. That's it.
We'll claim her for sure.
We'll claim her. Thank you, Holly. Thank you. There's a lot of wisdom in what you said. So for our viewers, what I heard is you stayed flexible with regard to the opportunities. You were willing to take risks. You were willing to shift focus from telecommunications to energy. And we're really not kidding about it, whether it's our forum, right, Holly, or any other networking opportunity. The power of networking is not to be overrated or underestimated, correct? The relationships.
It is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would say that my biggest career changes and job moves have not been because I answered a job placement ad, wherever that was, which has changed in my career. I've been with the workforce long enough, and we've gone away from newspaper ads to online job applications. But it's been because of people I've known and the connections that I've made, and being specific in my interests and saying that to people without feeling self-conscious about it, that I'd be really interested if the opportunity opened up to come work with you. And so, being direct with people about what you want is really, I think, important to getting what you want, because otherwise people will assume maybe you're not interested, or they'll make assumptions about what they think your interest should be. So I would encourage, everyone, especially, students who are now graduating from college and entering into the workforce, be direct about what you want. Be open to opportunities, but don't assume that somebody knows what you want to do.
Great advice. Great advice. Well, Julie, you're not even in energy, and you're doing energy.
Absolutely. And I think that is not unlike Holly in that sense. You know, it's following where the opportunities are and also bringing your talents to whatever it is that you do.
Right.
Um,
Where did you start? You were in state government, right? After college, you want to walk us through your
Sure.
career path?
Sure. So I got an undergraduate degree in biology and went to work for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission as a biologist, where I worked for 8 years. And during that time, I got my master's while I was working and really, really enjoyed that experience in state government to not only get to understand how the work gets done, but also working alongside some of just the most committed public servants that you'll ever meet. You know, it really is a noble pursuit, and that grounding has definitely stuck with me throughout my career. After those 8 years, I was interested in influencing the decisions that got made that affected Florida's environment, and I recognized that Audubon was one of the best places to get that done. And so I met with the then executive director and said, I really think you should hire me. And it took a few conversations, but ultimately he came around to my way of seeing things.
You beat him down?
And it ended up being a really remarkable partnership. You know, I found somebody who was an extraordinary mentor for me, and at the same time, I brought great talents to him in the forms of communication and my science background, and it also presented the opportunity to continually learn. That's one of the things that I love most about my job is that I'm not an energy expert, but boy, do I get to dig into the Power Plant Siting Act, you know, and you know, figuring out, okay, this is where the barrier is, and popping the hood on that thing and rooting around in that engine to find out, you know, what's not firing the way that it's supposed to, and making it work even better than it did before. So
I've never heard it described that way, but
that's policy work.
It works. So, but Julie, it's again kind of reflecting back on my history. Your organizations weren't always open, and it's mutual, right? And the companies weren't always open in working collaboratively toward that common goal. And so much progress has been made in that regard, which is wonderful. But what are the skill sets, Julie, that you've had to use to be effective in that way, to make sure that, you know, corporate America is listening to what you're saying, but by the same token, you being willing to compromise toward something that's workable for everyone?
Absolutely. And I might differ with you a little bit there and just say that in any partnership, there are times when you can agree to disagree. And the important thing is that your relationship is founded on mutual respect and an appreciation for each other's perspectives and a mutual commitment that you're going to work for that win-win as much as is feasible. And I think that's what's made us such successful collaborators. The reality is that Audubon is grounded in sound science. You know, we are not an organization of highly pitched rhetoric, and we're also we pride ourselves in advancing common sense, pragmatic solutions. And you know, when your relationship is grounded in that, there is a lot of opportunity for getting great things done together.
Very well said. Very well said. I just, I hope that folks who were not able to listen to your interview get a chance to come back and listen to it, because combined, both of you combined, what you've just said in the last 10 minutes is what amounts to gold nuggets in professional negotiation and relationship building. And you said the two magic words, mutual respect, right, Julie? Mutual respect. And Holly, I have found you to be a very effective listener. You really have mastered that. How important is that as a skill set for the college students that are you know, trying to get into the workforce? it is, I would say, and let me pick on my own children, that generation, they're used to the spontaneous, right? I can text and get an answer right away. And I have found, at least as it relates to my 20 plus something, a level of impatience that they've had to work on. And so how important is listening for the college students hoping to get into the energy industry?
I think with communication, sometimes there's too much emphasis and thought given to what you're going to say to somebody else, and not how much effort and time you're going to put into listening to where they're coming from. Because you really, I think, to be effective, you've got to listen. You know, I can come into a meeting and have my talking points down cold. I can have all the facts at hand. But if I'm just sitting there talking and I'm not talking about what's important to you, I'm not talking about the things that are relevant to you, I've built my case up in my own head, but it's not the case that persuades you because I haven't listened, then all my talking is not doing any good. So I can't be effective in conveying Duke's position, Duke's view, Duke's policy, whatever, if I hadn't spent a good amount of time listening to whoever it is that I'm trying to share that with and persuade. Because again, you're just talking, you're kind of talking to yourself, and you got yourself all persuaded and you bounce it off your coworker and you're like, oh, that's great. But if the other side is not hearing from what they need to hear and what's persuasive, and you're not understanding where they're coming from and how you can address that, then you can talk all day and you're not going to get anywhere. So I think listening is way underemphasized. And everyone wants to have, like you say, Lila, I want to have that quick comeback. You know, I've got the little sound bite and I want to tweet it out or post it on Instagram and I'm done. And it's also being patient. And sometimes you have to let people talk. And sometimes you just have to let them vent. And you just have to listen to them and sort of sift through all that then to figure out, well, what is it underneath that they're really trying to tell you? And you may have to come back and have another conversation. And you have to be willing perhaps to feel uncomfortable that they aren't going to tell you you've done a great job and that they enjoy paying their monthly bill to you each month, and they like what you've done with that power plant or solar field nearby, and you've done a great job camouflaging that transmission line or substation or what have you, that they really, you've got to be willing to listen. You've got to be willing to listen with candor and with appreciation, no matter how difficult the messages that you're hearing.
So that's wonderful, Holly. And so that our younger workforce talent doesn't think that I'm singling them out or picking on them, I have to tell you that it's also true that the older we get, like me, I'm going to talk about myself here. The older we get, sometimes we're trying to spit out the thought before we forget it. So that's both ways. That's both ways. And either way, it's a work. You have to work.
It does.
To effectively listen. You have to listen. So it's there are issues of discipline all the way around. I'm sure. So I think we've handled the advice. What advice would you give to a college student? Let's talk about work-life balance, because I know, here's the perfect example. We had to reschedule our interview from last week because I had a family emergency. Thank you, both of you, for understanding and working with me on your calendars. And I think when I posted the invite for this, I said, listen, this is an example of work-life balance. I've often said, Julie, that work-life balance for me is any given minute, a particular decision, right? It's minute by minute, day by day. How have you found that you can do both at the same time?
I think I'm still working on it, and I think that everybody is working on it. I think it's interesting. I don't often hear men ask this question. And so I try to remind myself of that too, that, when I'm working with my team members, that I'm trying to give them the space to contribute in their lives equally. For me, I work crazy hours. I think a lot of people do, but that's actually what makes things flexible enough for me and for my family. I'm a single parent, and I want to be an active participant in my child's life. And so Working from home in this crazy time of COVID and virtual schooling definitely is not for the faint of heart. But I'm hoping that this experience has also given us an opportunity to learn some new ways of working, some new ways of being flexible with not just our teams, but also with ourselves. And I think we're going to come out of this thing recognizing that there's more than one right way of doing things.
Absolutely.
And we're better for that.
Absolutely. And I think, Holly, as it relates to companies, I think also in a way that makes us all more efficient, right?
It does. And so I've been working from home since mid-March, and then I'm probably going to continue to work from home until after the first of the year at least. And in some ways I have gained, I feel like, a little bit of time in my day that was otherwise lost to things like my commute downtown. And so I've appreciated the ability to balance things out that way. I had one of the things that struck me about what Julie said about men not usually getting asked this question. I will say one of the things I've appreciated about everyone working from home is that kids are equal opportunity interrupters. And so whereas before, maybe as moms, we tended to be the default, somebody's missing school, got to stay home, we're the ones working from home as, one-offs, more so than perhaps the fathers and the men in the household might. But when everybody's working from home, the 3-year-old doesn't care. So
right.
I feel like in that respect, it's been a real equalizer. And the other thing too, I've been fortunate in my work and in several jobs now that I have had a lot of flexibility in juggling and balancing my work and my family's needs. But not everyone has had that benefit. And what I do hope is that for people who haven't had that benefit, but they have been able to take advantage of it in the current environment and working remotely, that makes their bosses and their organizations realize that there are benefits to treating employees with more flexibility and perhaps not being as rigid and holding people to, well, if it's Monday through Friday and it's between 8 and 5, you can have your hour for lunch in there somewhere and it better be around lunch. Otherwise, you've got to be on things. There's more flexibility and maybe more humanity for everyone in the workplace that evolves from it.
And isn't it so? COVID, I think, shed light on, pardon the pun, on some of that, but I also think it's gotten appropriately wrapped into the social justice conversation. I think executives have paid particular attention to. We understand you have to work at home. You don't have Wi-Fi. We'll figure out how to get you Wi-Fi. You don't have Google Chrome or Chromebook, we will get that for you. You don't have a laptop, we will, and then when the schools didn't open right away, I think executives understood that a parent needed to be home, whether it was the father, mother, grandmother, it didn't matter. I mean, how could you expect your employee to come back to work when the schools weren't open? So it's heartwarming to see that kind of flexibility and adaptability. And I think it's part of that conversation going forward. How many companies will not need the different district offices? How many firms won't need that office? How many, I think there's a renewed trust in the team too. And Anna Ortega, I have to tell you, the very wonderful Anna Ortega, who is working with the students for us at the forum, serves as an executive aide to a public service commissioner, just gave us another example of work-life balance. She's watching the two of you at the park with her daughter, and her daughter,
that's awesome.
She's listening to this. So, we never get political on this show, and I don't really want to. So I'm asking this question from a non-political sense. Just, we are the Florida's Women in Energy Leadership Forum. Regardless of political affiliation, Julie and Holly, we do, looks like we've got a vice president-elect, first woman in that office. What has that meant to you personally and professionally?
I think representation matters, and it's important for people to have folks that they can relate to aspire to. And so for that, that's a great thing. I will say I was a little chagrined that I think I was perhaps more impressed by the momentous nature of that outcome. And my daughter was, I mean, she was impressed, but she was also like, well, of course,
Of
Mom,
course, right, right.
because girls can be vice presidents. And at first I was a little incensed, I won't lie. But then I was like, you know what? I'm actually really glad about that because, you know, it means that the world that she's growing up in and her reality is different from what mine was at that age.
That's a tremendous point. You know, when we were growing up, those things didn't seem reachable, right? What we're doing today, frankly, didn't seem reachable. So it's nice. It's nice that our children, that ceiling has dropped a little. I mean, I think can't we all agree that it's in our lifetime, things are changing, right? And at least in our world, Holly, there are more women and minorities in the industry. And when I started the forum, Julie, our first forum, 2016, I mentioned that when I was appointed to the commission, I'd walk into an all male room and very often was the only woman in the room. And we can't say that today. I mean, we all acknowledge there's more work to be done in terms of what the table looks like overall in all industries. But we have to also stop and acknowledge the progress. Holly, what's it meant for you?
Well, I think it is exciting for the country and for what it means for women leaders in this country, particularly in the political sphere, that we do have a woman vice president. So I think that's great. But I agree with Julie when my daughter's a little bit too young, I think, to be really focused on it. But my son's in high school, and I think he's kind of like Julie's daughter, where he's like, well, it's okay, that's not that big of a deal. But that seems natural to him, which I also think is great. And I think as an industry, we have made progress. And here at Duke Energy in Florida, we do have a lot of women leaders, starting with Catherine at the top on our team. But I can also look around within the company and with other parts of the industry. And there are other pockets and other sort of spaces where there is not as much diversity at the table, and have walked in and still been the only woman in the room. And so there's still places where we could be making progress and doing better. But as you said, too, we need to take a moment and pause and reflect on how far we have come, because in my working lifetime, we have made a lot of progress. And, coming into the workforce today looks very different than when I first entered the workforce fresh out of college. And I won't mention how many years ago that was.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, because you would be talking about all. Well, I want to thank.
I know, one day any of us.
I want to thank the two of you, and Julie. Hopefully, by now that we've convinced you to register for the forum, because it is a recognition that we still have more work to do. But it's not just for us or for the industry. We do sponsor students at the forum, and we want to make sure that they have a good experience and good access to the industry, because after all, we are trying to get them hired and give economic empowerment to generations to come, I hope. Thank you for your leadership, both of you. It's a pleasure to meet you, Julie.
And you.
I look forward to a long working relationship. And Holly, you're a rock star. Thank you for all that you do. Appreciate you. Have a good evening,
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At the forum.
Okay.